Ooh, g'day everybody, and it is very overexposed. 1 second, 1 second. Configure video, camera control, exposure. Ooh, that's a little better. I'm just going to autofocus it and expose it. Alrighty, I'm just going to open this blinds up, make it a little bit brighter in here. Perfect. G'day. Alrighty, we're just going to get things kicked off. Alrighty. Oh, okay. I'm gonna need to fix that. Just 1 sec while you guys. We haven't had anyone jump in yet, so that's alright. So we will just quickly resize. I'm just gonna lock all that. Oh, no. I'm just gonna resize the screen so we can see everything. There we go. Sweet. Alrighty. Welcome to PowerShell 101 Live. Official kickoff. So we don't have anyone in the room at the moment. I do see some people are online, so I think they're just kind of getting themselves together. I'm going to wait a couple more minutes, and then we'll get kicked off. So I think I'm waiting on my helper Christian as well. I'm not sure where he's at. I'll send him a text. He might be still asleep. Yeah, when you don't have kids or anything like that, you generally sleep in. Yeah, when you have kids, that's not an option. So, alrighty. Let me just see if anyone's online in the channel. I don't think so. Okay, so we'll just hang around for a little bit, see how we go. Alrighty. Okay, sweet. Probably need the chat to be there so I can see everything that's going on. Kind of get myself sorted out here as well. Alright, we'll give it a few more minutes, and what I'll do is I'll quickly flick back to streaming soon, and we'll give it a few more minutes, and then we will kick it off. So let's do that. Alrighty. Alright, so let's gonna get this kicked off. Got to desktop audio. So welcome to PowerShell 101 Live. So free training for PowerShell. This is basically out of my own time, so I'm just trying to contribute to the community. This is going to be a series, so we're going to quickly talk about the course curriculum. I've kind of just looked at what generally people who are starting off with PowerShell need. And we're just going to be focusing on that. We're not going to be focusing on any of the advanced stuff. We are going to have a look at some of the advanced stuff. I'm going to have some guest speakers come in and talk about that. But initially we're just going to be just kind of bare basics, and then we're going to kind of build this up. So this stream is going to be a replay of one of my previous talks, but there's also just going to be some other little bits and pieces in there that we're going to talk about. Slides are on the notebook. The link to the slides is in the notebook channel. So if you're on Discord, yep, definitely thing. Also, if you jump in Discord and have a chat, because it's always good if we're actually talking to a person rather than kind of just a blank screen. If you guys got questions, you can just yell out at the same time. Well, that's when we have the questions, or alternatively, you can just post questions in the chat and we can get to it. So if you've signed into Twitch, or you have a Twitch account, you can obviously post to this channel. So there's no issues there. So if you don't, just yeah, you can jump in Discord. Alternatively, you can just post it inside of the notebook classroom channel. Alrighty, with that all ado, let's get started. So, PowerShell 101 Live, welcome. Hope you guys stick around. Hope you guys hold up for the series. We're going to just be talking about a brief overview of PowerShell, what's it about, things like that. So, let's get stuck into it. It's going to be a little lecture for these first few, because I kind of want to get everyone just on the same page, on the same foundation. There's going to be different people have got different come from different skill levels in terms of programming, having an ability to write code, to having no understanding of writing code at all. So we're going to kind of just cover the basics, and then we're going to slowly build up. So first things first, we're going to talk about the course curriculum. So this is going to be it's going to be, I think it's a 13-week course. So it's going to pretty much take us all the way into December every Saturday at 9 a.m. And this course is basically going to be really geared towards people who obviously, yeah, need a bit of an introduction to PowerShell. So obviously this lesson we're going to be doing an introduction. We're going to be looking at just basic things. It's going to be really quite easy. It's not going to be that difficult. We are going to obviously then move into object-oriented programming. I kind of want to touch into that. We're going to go in a little bit more. We're going to touch on it today, but we are going to go into a lot of depth next lesson, because we're going to need to cover specific concepts. We're going to be exploring specific elements of object-oriented programming, which also helps you guys start to familiarize yourself with why PowerShell is doing specific things. So if you've got a burning question about why is PowerShell doing this, it's going to probably most likely related to any sort of object-oriented programming. I generally have people asking me questions all the time about, hey, I'm trying to access this property, but it's not working. And then basically just looking at it, it's not a property, it's an object. You're actually trying to reference an object. So things like that basically all follow from this. The next thing is PowerShells and objects. So we're going to basically be looking at PowerShell and objects. We're going to be looking at exploring how PowerShell handles objects. We're going to be looking at creation of objects, removal of objects, all the different types of objects, you name it, it's all going to be in that lesson. We're going to talk about PowerShell and filtering. PowerShell and filtering is going to be mainly geared towards obviously the where object, but when we're using where methods, things like that. So we're going to be looking at how to actually filter our collections, filter our arrays, filter our code. We're also going to be looking at PowerShell and looping. So we're going to basically be doing specific loops, looking at different loop types and how they actually kind of fit in the big scheme of things. The next one we're going to be doing is scripting with PowerShell. So we've kind of talked about the first set of elements, and we're kind of just building towards that scripting for PowerShell scripting to PowerShell lesson, which basically gives you the understanding of actually how to write PowerShell code. The following one is going to be debugging in PowerShell. So debugging in PowerShell, how to actually get around, debug PowerShell, get a bit of an understanding rather than kind of just blind firing code and seeing if it's working or not. So debugging in PowerShell is very, very useful. It also speeds up your development process. Using PowerShell to get around. So I added this. This was something I kind of added in the last minute, but I do think it's something that I think is really important, which is teaching you guys how to actually get around PowerShell, get comfortable with, working in PowerShell and not kind of having to go to Google every 5 seconds. So it's just kind of, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how that I get around PowerShell that basically works for me. So if I'm troubleshooting an issue, how I'm actually going to do that. Versus kind of going to Google. So that's another thing that's really quite handy, and it's really, 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 really useful. Functions and advanced functions. So now we're going to start touching on the really, really, important stuff. So basically, we're going to be looking at PowerShell functions and advanced functions. So this is now we're going to start stepping into that we've kind of covered the beginning stuff. Now we're going to start stepping into the intermediate stuff. We're going to look at PowerShell and the internet. So how does PowerShell interact with the internet? That's something that's a lot of people that generally can have a few questions here and there. The following one will be logging your code, testing your code, and then the final one is configuration as code. So logging your code is going to be something we're going to look at. It's going to be another talk that I've done. That I've actually wrote a chapter on. So basically it talks about the best practices when it comes to logging, why we log our code, looking at all the different types of streams within PowerShell, things like that. The next one is testing your code. So the earlier you guys can understand unit and unit integration and end-to-end testing, the better it is for you. So people generally, it took me many years to kind of get my head around it, but for you guys, if you can come out of the gates initially and have an understanding of it, it means that you're going to be a lot more successful going forward, because pretty much every place now should have unit and integration test for their code. And then the final one is going to be configuration as code. So I'm hoping to get one of my good friends, Wayne, to be able to actually give a lecture on configuration as code. So that's going to be looking at the likes of desired state configuration. So this is something that PowerShell it's kind of the second part of PowerShell. These are very advanced topics, so we're going to kind of try and keep it as basic as possible for you guys, so you guys can have a bit of an understanding what's going on there. The testing as code session as well. I'm trying to line up another mate to be able to deliver that. I've kind of got two guys in mind. If one kind of can't do it, but basically it's the same premise. We're going to be basically this is just going to have a friend there. We're going to be these are advanced topics. So coolio. Alrighty, let's get stuck into it. So first things first, we need to go to the next slide. So one of the things I'm wanting to do is you can see here we've got assessment. I believe wholeheartedly that assessment is the key for you guys to understand, to get your head around PowerShell. You're not going to understand PowerShell if you don't use it. If you don't use it, you lose it. So I've seen a lot of people go on courses for a week of PowerShell and they're like, yeah, I'm ready to write some PowerShell, and then they don't have a clue what to write it for. A lot of PowerShell is best suited towards your personal projects. Once you understand your personal projects, you then can basically tailor specific elements to businesses. So there's a summit talk that I've just recently released, which basically talks about automating and writing serverless code using PowerShell to create an IT service self-service portal. So we're going to be leveraging all these different technologies and PowerShell and a bit of C#, HTML, and CSS. And JavaScript to be able to actually create a serverless IT self-service portal. Now, one of the things that's really the only reason why I've kind of had a really good, how I've actually gotten that concept was because I had a personal project that I wrote that did that exact process. So obviously that concept was lifted and shifted, and then you can tailor it towards anything. And that was a personal project. So there's there's building a serverless PowerShell web service. So that is basically the intended use. So if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So I think that is that. So what we've got as an assessment is fairly straightforward. I didn't want to make it too complicated for you guys, because I do think that making it too complicated can be a bit difficult. I'm actually going to see if I can go live in channel. Go live. Stop streaming, stream settings. Apparently, stop streaming. I'll just stream it anyway. So, what the assessment's going to be is we're going to basically be automate. I want you guys to automate the following. So we're going to be creating a client Hyper-V using client Hyper-V. So if you guys haven't had client Hyper-V installed, go ahead and install it. We're going to build a VM. So that's the first thing we're going to do. On that VM, we're going to install Windows 10. Once we've installed Windows 10, we're going on the VM, we're going to install the OBS Studio version 24. So we're going to install OBS, and we're also going to install Visual Studio Code. So some of you guys can look at it and go, I can probably do that right now, but just a lot of you guys can probably fumble around on Google and get it done right now. And I encourage you guys to work with this project while we're going through the different steps and refactor your code. And what I mean by refactoring is I mean basically updating the code so that it's using best practices, it's using better logic, things like that. So you're not necessarily, you're simplifying your code. So we're going to refactor I encourage you guys to refactor your code so that basically the OBS, so that it'll eventually be the way that I think everyone should have it, which should be as configuration as code. So initially, I think it'll be basically it'll be a PowerShell script to install VM, which I think will be the same, and then we're going to be installing OBS and Visual Studio Code, which I will believe it should be of DSC configuration. So that is basically that in terms of what we're going to be doing. So next thing. We've paused your preview to save your resources. What? Stream is still running. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we're just going to talk quick a little bit about me. I'm going to kind of just breeze through this so it's not too much. And let's get started. So I'm a former student of South Bank Institute of Technology. A senior automation consultant at Insync Technology. I've been writing PowerShell since 2013. I play paintball, I like running, and I'm trained in CQB. So some random things there. You can basically catch me on obviously the Bruce Pug. I'm also the co-founder of the Brisbane PowerShell user group, myself, Wayne, and Alex. And yeah, I also yeah, it's pretty much that. I love DOS. I basically was DOS in 2004, so that's DOS MS-DOS 4.2. Been writing VB script. I was writing VB script in 2005, and from 2005 to 13, and then yeah, PowerShell from 2013 to today. Yeah, run the Brisbane PowerShell user group. So you can see there that there basically is a whole bunch of info there down the bottom where you can follow me on Twitter if you already haven't, things like that. So good to go. Next, so let's get stuck into it. So what is PowerShell? So this is something that a lot of people will think it's a scripting language, or it's it's just something else. It's a basic language. It's not really that special. PowerShell is more than that. So PowerShell is actually an automation and configuration framework. PowerShell is built on two key platforms or pillars. The first one's it's built on the .NET framework. It's basically built on .NET framework and C#, which basically is a language variant of C#. PowerShell offers more than just C#, so you can execute J#, VB.NET, and with some other modules you can run C++. So it makes it extremely versatile. I heard one person actually tell me that PowerShell is the glue that kind of holds all the Microsoft products together. While it's not technically literal, PowerShell does play a key part in the Microsoft technology. So under the hood, for example, if you're thinking about Exchange 2010, 13, 2016, under the hood, a lot of it's PowerShell. So if there was any sort of activities, things like that, it's all PowerShell under the hood. So any GUI action runs PowerShell. That was actually a bit of a constraint there because it meant that with PowerShell you couldn't with 2010, you couldn't upgrade PowerShell because if you upgraded PowerShell, there would be issues. So it was something that, yeah, excuse me. Sorry. It was something that was actually quite painful and also awesome. So desired state configuration is the second thing, the second pillar of PowerShell. So desired state configuration defines is basically it's just defining what how software environment should be configured. So PowerShell has an ability so that you can configure write infrastructure as code and be able to deploy that. And what happens is that basically PowerShell will generate a configuration file, which then can be applied, and then in turn, which will as I believe it was Jeffrey Snover. Was it Jeffrey Snover? I can't remember who said it, but basically what it does, it just makes it so. So if you've got an application you want to have deployed, you can write some desired state configuration and it will deploy it. And the biggest thing is that desired state configuration is really implemented to maintain state. So what I mean by that is, let's say you've got web services, you've got things like that, and there's basically it's designed to maintain the state of that service. So there's no what we call configuration drift. So if you've got some guys basically put some hack module in or something like that, configuration manager will actually go ahead and remove that because it's what we call it's out of scope. PowerShell with configuration manager, there's obviously a lot of other variants out there. So you do have Puppet, Ansible. I can't remember the other ones, but there's a lot of other configuration frameworks out there that also do the same thing. PowerShell obviously has a scripting engine as well, which is what we're going to be focusing on predominantly in this part of this organization. In this series, but we're also going to be talking about a little bit the desired state configuration as well, just at the end, because it's something that you guys need to be aware of. And it also means that having those skills, it means that you guys can actually be a lot more versatile. So PowerShell also offers unit-based testing. So initially it was a third-party module that was now actually made its way into PowerShell. But basically PowerShell is now has its own unit and integration testing platform called Pester. At the same time, it also supports administrative management of all your applications, so Active Directory, Exchange, Hyper-V, clustering, System Center Suite, VMware, things like that. It can interact with APIs using SOAP and REST, so it's very, very versatile. Especially online, there's a lot of technologies out there that actually support. Sorry, I'm just kind of having a memory blank for a sec. There's a lot of other technologies out there online that actually run PowerShell. So, for example, think of the likes of Azure Automation, Azure Functions, things like that. So basically, PowerShell is very, very versatile. It comes in many, many different flavors, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But basically, it's very, very versatile. So what can PowerShell do? So this is something that a lot of people basically kind of, from an overview, a lot of people kind of wonder what can PowerShell do for me? What can having PowerShell do for me? And I think the biggest one, which was actually really, really, really important, was this first one, which was PowerShell can actually increase your salary. So there was an article that was written by Josh Duffney, and basically it was called Doubling My Salary, a PowerShell Story. And he talked about the financial benefits of learning PowerShell. And one of the things that he actually was, as you can see with a quick screen grab there, he actually talked about the years of PowerShell experience with a corresponding salary. So PowerShell is a very, very lucrative skill to have, and it's a very useful skill to have. So, especially in Australia, I was actually at a Microsoft Ignite recently this year, and I kind of got caught up in this conversation where there was a discussion about PowerShell and that nobody knows PowerShell at all. And I actually interjected in the conversation and I said, I know PowerShell. And they said, oh, how much do you know PowerShell? And I said, I know PowerShell. I know it in and out, back to front. And they basically were actually taken aback because of the fact that PowerShell is something that generally a lot of the senior sysadmins have kind of used it, but didn't really use it. They use it for one-liners, things like that, where you have people like me who basically have just gone the whole nine yards and basically have built, modules and insane things. And the thing is that that is just something that's absolutely beneficial, and it's actually it's reflected through my salary through the last year. So over when the few recent jobs that I started, basically if I doubled my salary, effectively doubled my salary. So I can definitely say that this is 100% true. Some people say it can triple. I'm yet to see that because if it triples my salary, then I would be absolutely stoked. But at the same time, though, I can definitely say it doubles your salary. Having PowerShell is a phenomenal skill to have because it makes you a very, very versatile. Now, a lot of people think I might know every commandlet inside out, map back to front. No, I know how to use PowerShell and how to basically find what I need. So if I don't know a commandlet off the top of my head, I'm going to go find it. I have all the skills needed to be able to do that. I know how I have the skills to be able to write my code tests. I have the skills to be able to actually write modules and things like that. And I've authored a few modules, and we're actually going to see a couple. We're going to see one of them in action. One of the things that you can do is write PowerShell modules, and so this is one of the things I did. I actually wrote a PowerShell module called Desire to Learn. Desire to Learn is an LMS system that is an LMS system that was developed in the US, and basically it was something we actually did for a client. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump in this talk. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my videos. No, not that one. Okay, so this is basically a me here. I've just got a pre-recorded video, makes it a little bit easier to demo. I've got my my PowerShell module, so I've just import module D2L. So this is a complete module written from the ground up. So as you can see, we can write module. I'm connecting to the D2L online service. So on the right hand side here, this is just basically like their API Explorer that I'm using, and I'm just connecting to this instance online. So I can just grabbing the app ID and the app key. It's public, so there's no real I don't have to worry about client info. It's just all public content. And we can basically connect to the host name. You can see there. Callback URL. This is interesting. You can see here I'm using 127.0.0.1. The reason why is because I need to capture the HTTP response back, which is it's easier to use 127.0.0.1. So as you can see here, I've got my OAuth login. So it's kind of funny because this is technically not OAuth. I'm just going to say this right now. So I have a talk about what REST is the Wild West. This is basically an example. So it's using a different authentication method. So it's not an OAuth standard method. And in here, basically, I'm then just doing get to L user, get to L user. I'm saying who am I? So while this is, it seems very simplistic, the amount of code that's actually under the hood that's actually making actioning this is something that basically needs to be it's quite complex. But at the same time, though, this is what you can do. You can basically write whatever you want, so it's not the end of the world. So it's something that I do think a lot of people can benefit from. So another one which was quite interesting, and this was a few years ago, I wrote a Battlefield 4 pixel aimbot as a proof of concept with PowerShell. That's a little bit crazy because a lot of people think, I've got aimbots and things like that are a little bit out of, a little bit crazy. It's a little bit unorthodox. And I like doing unorthodox things, especially because in this instance, writing this was like, it was an ongoing project, and it was something that I thought was very difficult to do, but then once I got my head around all the logic, it actually was very, very simple. And this was actually, if you can see the background here, this was something that I was at work, and I was writing my logic out at work, exploring with my good mate Wayne. We're talking about how the logic would work. So you can see there's a little bit of math there in terms of what needs to be done to action things. And I was just kind of like stepping out my logic in this kind of sense. And I was kind of always have a bit of a smile there when I basically draw the head and then there's an unhappy face. But yeah, so this was a proof of concept, and it was definitely not even close to production. Like it wasn't even an alpha. but it was something that
Alright,
was
can I
quite
get you to
interesting.
go
So
for a
I'm
run?
just going to turn this off. So basically you can see these, like you can see those kind of those flicks, and those flicks are basically is the code reorientating the marker, and it's basically just using the marker on the spot marker. As you can see, it's fairly like it's all right. Like I'm not going to say it's great. Like it's all right, but it's just something that basically you can see there right there. It just flicked straight up. And so this was something that yeah, it took a while to write. As you can see, there's a lot of errors that it's pumping out because it's just the code's not up to scratch. But yes, I wrote an aimbot for it because I just thought, hey, that's pretty cool. Like, and what's actually really interesting is that that code, like, while most people think, oh, he wrote an aimbot, what a tool. That code is actually, again, it while the code is, can be used for specific purposes like um, looking at where a player is and then aimbotting that. That same code can actually be applied to weather forecasting, which is kind of weird. And it's been something that I've kind of kept on the back burner for a little while and I'm working on occasionally. But basically, it's the right weather forecasting algorithms with it. So it's interesting concept. So it's not something that basically it's a once like the code can be the code can be changed to whatever it needs to be. Another one is the PowerShell Universal Dashboard. So one of the really cool things about the PowerShell Universal Dashboard is it's a module that was written by Adam Discro. Discro? I can't pronounce his last name. But basically, you can write configuration in PowerShell, and that configuration in PowerShell can be compiled into a dashboard. So I've got the Brisbane PowerShell user group dashboard, scripting games dashboard submission winner. And here basically he's just running PowerShell, wait for it to come up. You can see, okay, now it's started. And so you can see here, this is just basically getting stock information. And this is all just configuration. So it's not something that's crazy. It's just writing some configuration. The module will compile it and make it look like this. And it looks really, really cool. So it's something that, yeah, that's really cool. So that's obviously another one that's quite handy to see. So what do we got to here? So the next one we've got is the PowerShell gallery. So if you guys are not familiar with the PowerShell gallery, if you've used Linux or things like that, so basically PowerShell gallery is similar to your sudo apt-get. It's just basically a nice centralized location where you can get your modules, your DSC resources, things like that. So I've got a quick nice little demo here, which is basically I've got Azure RM Key Vault, so I'm going to open up PowerShell. It's just gone blank because of UAC. So I'm installing that module, so I can just go install module name, Azure RM Key Vault, and it'll go get it from the gallery once it decides to install. And it's super, super easy, super, super simple. Not that difficult. And this is one of the things that really simplified PowerShell. So a lot of the previously it was just out in the west and people on Wild West, and people had different things lying out in different areas. And this has definitely changed to how everything's kind of changed. The final one, what we're going to quickly look at, is Pester testing. So Pester is basically unit testing and integration testing for your PowerShell code. So what I've got here is I've got a Pester test that I'm running, and so basically what I've got here is this is one of my personal projects that I was running for in PowerShell 101 with Michael and Christian. We basically wrote a remote execution PowerShell bot. And so what this basically did was it's basically it's running integration tests to test each of the components to make sure that it's ready for demo. So this is basically a quick run I can run through. Yep, my code's ready for demo. There's no outstanding errors, things like that. So you can see here, I'm looking for specific types of errors, looking for things that basically shouldn't be the way that they should. And then also I'm actually sending bad data to actually see the code being able to handle that. So we should be looking for errors when they come back and seeing things like that. So that's pretty much that in terms of unit testing. So that's pretty straightforward. As you can see there's running different jobs and things like that. Unit testing is really handy, especially when you're trying to test really, really big projects. And the more you have your tests, the more relevant your tests are, the better that the success of the project is going to be. So if you just do really basic stuff, yeah, it's all right. But if you do more advanced, won't say more advanced, but you do more relevant tests, the chances of your project being deployed successfully is much higher. Alrighty, so enough talking about what it can do for you. We're going to actually talk about the PowerShell commandlet. So what we're going to be talking about in this instance is the PowerShell commandlet itself. So some of you guys, we're going to be, obviously, like I said before, we're just going to be touching on the most basic theory possible, and then we're going to be expanding on it. So some of you guys are already going to know this, that's fine, other people are not. So I just kind of hope that everyone can kind of just level it, go with it, and then once, obviously, we're going to have more advanced stuff in the curriculum, so it's not going to be something that, yeah, just go with it for the time being. Let the other people catch up, and we'll see how we go. So, PowerShell commandlet. So basically, it's a lightweight command that's used in PowerShell environment. Now, PowerShell uses verb noun, the verb and noun name pair to name your commandlets. So when you're writing commandlets or you're writing functions, follow suit because it makes it much easier. Don't use meh. I use meh a lot in just for demoing code, but if you're basically writing production code, you always need to write everything, write it to the standard that basically Microsoft have, because if you do it, then you're not going to have issues. Now, the biggest thing with a PowerShell commandlet, it's not a standalone executable. So commandlets are actually instances of objects. So for example, if you think about ping or net.exe or tracer.t, those are actually they're actually executables. So they're something that runs in its own memory. PowerShell commandlets are basically are not that. They run inside a PowerShell itself. So they're just compiled code. In essence. So PowerShell also does a lot more than what just traditional commandlets did. So they can do parsing, error presentation, output formatting. That's all handled by PowerShell. And that's really important because traditionally you just wouldn't have that with the command, like with your executables. That's just not possible. So it's really important to really understand. So we're going to talk about the verb noun naming standard and why. So it was developed to make it easier to understand the intention of the commandlet, and it was also made it easier to find. So the biggest problem you had was back in the day, especially if you think back in the Windows Server 2003, 2008 as well. Basically, doing any sort of domain task, creating Active Directory users, things like that, you're either using LDAP or you're using the Active Directory commands themselves. And it was something that was really arduous, and it was really difficult to use. When Jeffrey Snover wrote PowerShell and created PowerShell, the intention was to do away with that and create a standard that everyone was to actually follow. And this is actually something that's really important because by doing that, you simplify the entire process. And it's actually something I quickly want to talk about, and I'll just quickly digress off into another area for a quick sec, is the key to automation is a three-step process. You need to identify what you're trying to do. You need to you need to identify, simplify, and automate. So identifying is identifying the key aspects of what you're wanting to achieve. Simplifying is simplifying that, and then automating is automating. So rather than going straight into the automation process, in this instance, Jeffrey Snover thought about it and gone, well, I don't like the naming standard. I want the naming standard to be better. So what they did was they changed it, and they basically said, hey, let's just make it a verb noun. Why? Because people understand it. It's an easier way to understand something than ping. Now, ultimately, everyone knows ping, and the reason why they know ping is because ping is something that's kind of ingrained into us from the get-go. But if you didn't know ping, you think about it, it's not something that actually is really intuitive. Whereas in PowerShell, it actually is testnet connection, which is a lot more intuitive than ping. Ping is actually a different. It's just completely weird. So using test, if you know it's something to do with test, I could just go get command test and then find all the corresponding test commands. Okay, it's testnet connection. That's most likely what it is. The verb prefix, so the verb prefix in a verb noun naming standard describes the action. So what I mean by that is, think of the verb as it's obviously a doing word. So for example, you're going to have multiple verbs with the same thing, but they're obviously going to have a different noun. So for example, let's go through the big four, which is get, set, update, and actually it's a get, set, add, remove. They're your big four. The fifth is update. So if you wanted to fetch a command, get command. If you wanted to create a file, well, okay, if we wanted to create, would it be create? Okay, well, yeah, it could be create file. It could be new file, but it's going to be new file. That's just because I know it. But this is the whole concept, is that once you actually understand the verbs, now the verbs have to be approved. And this is one of the big things, that there is an approved verb. So if we quickly jump in Google, I'm just going to quickly fire up Firefox. Go approved verbs. Now I've seen this, admittedly, some people like to put their cowboy boots on and vary from this, but everything has an approved verb. So for example, if you wanted to say add, don't use append, attach, concatenate, or insert. Use add. That's the intended verb. So when you are specifying your verbs, you need to be explicit. And the thing is that for us as consumers, we only need to know roughly what the ones that need to be. We kind of just need to know the approved ones. The unapproved ones, yeah, they kind of need to get their act together. They need to follow the standard, and the standard basically makes it easier for everyone to follow. The noun suffix describes the resource. So think of it as, for example, let's use item. Item in PowerShell can describe a file, it can describe a registry entry, it can describe a directory. It basically pertains to something to do with the file system registry. I think it even pertains to other elements as well. But essentially, item can be, for example, if you want to create a file, new item. If you want to get that file, new get item. If you want to enumerate a whole bunch of files and directories, get child item. If you want to get some other, you want to remove an item, remove item. You want to write something, sorry, you want to rename something, set item. So that pertains to the file. Now, I will talk about item for a quick second, because item is actually something that's really important to understand. Item pertains to the file. It doesn't pertain to the content within it. So when we're talking items, we're talking to the file itself. We're not talking about the content. So that's something that's really important. Some people are like, well, I'm trying to get I'm trying to read a text file, but it's only returning the size and the file name, and that's correct, because it only pertains to the file content. The file properties. It doesn't contain the content. Nouns are abbreviated if they're too long. So what I mean by that is, if you see something, for a great example is, let's use Active Directory PowerShell module. So if you've got the Active Directory PowerShell module, you import module Active Directory, and then you're going to go get AD user. So get AD user is synonymous to get Active Directory user. AD is abbreviated. You wouldn't type in get Active Directory user is just a little bit too long. So if it can be abbreviated, it will be. And AD is quite an easy one to abbreviate, because everyone knows AD. So yeah. So these are some, I'm just going to quickly just throw some commandlets in there. We're just going to quickly go through. I'm going to talk about them, and then we're going to talk about why I've got them in this slide. So for example, we've got rename computer. What's that going to do? It's going to rename a computer. Add Windows feature. So when we're adding a Windows feature, we're installing Windows features on a server operating system. New net IP address. It's creating an IP address. It's creating an IP address. Set DNS client server address. That's pretty straightforward. We're setting a DNS address on our adapter. Restart computer. We're rebooting a computer. Now that also can stop. I think we got stop computer. I can't remember. We also got install ADDS forest, which is creating an Active Directory domain services for us. It's very straightforward. And set DNS server forwarder. So we're forwarding our DNS server traffic from our local DNS server to another DNS server. So these commands, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 commands. What do you think? I've put these commands in there intentionally, but what do you guys think? I want you guys, I'm just going to stop for a few seconds. Guys, I just want you to think about what do you think it's going to be used for. So if you're logged in on Twitch and you have the capacity to chat, just chuck it in the Twitch chat, that's fine. But what I want you guys to have a think about is what are those commands or commandlets? What do you think the outcome is of running all those commandlets? So I'll let you guys have a few seconds while we just have a bit of a think about it, and then we'll go to the next slide. Alrighty, so what that is, we're just going to go straight next slide. This is a quick demo script that I wrote, and what this does is builds me a domain controller in a new Active Directory forest. So very straightforward. So you imagine, let's kind of take a step back, think about when we're talking about building domain controllers. If you go back to the Windows Server 2003 days, how did we have to build our domain controller? We had to DC promo. We had to run DC promo, and we had to go through these steps, and automating it was the worst. It was such a time-consuming process, and writing VB script to support it was so difficult. And so most people just wrote batch scripts, and it was just an absolute nightmare to run a DC promo and do this. PowerShell has made it so much easier. They've basically catered for a lot of that stuff we just don't need to do. Preparing the schema. I don't care about that. Just install a domain controller. That's all I care about. And this is the thing with PowerShell, is that those 9 commands, was it 9? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry, 7 commands. Those 7 commands allowed us to build a domain controller. And that's something that is really, really important. G'day, mate. How you going? And this is something that, as from an automation perspective, that's awesome. That's really cool. And this is the thing, we can actually take this one step further. So let's think about, we talked about briefly before about desired state configuration. So just, I'm going to throw another question at you guys. I kind of want to have a think about, I want you guys to think about how many lines, but I'm going to challenge you guys, how many lines of code in DSC do you think it's going to take to build a domain controller? So I'm just going to let it sit for about 20 seconds. Okay, so to build a domain controller in desired state configuration, you need one line of code to build a domain controller. Now, ultimately, you need to obviously specify the configuration that you want to build, but essentially one line of code for a domain controller versus, obviously, we've got 30 lines of code, but it can even be simplified and down to one line, which that is powerful stuff. That is super powerful stuff. That is the reason why PowerShell is so powerful, is because it's taking these really complex tasks that we used to do back in the day and simplifying them to the point where we can, to building a domain controller is one line, compared to back in the day, building a domain controller was a couple of hours of your time, and a lot of clicking. You imagine you can create a desired state configuration, you can push it to that machine, and you can say, make it so, build me a domain controller, build me a web server, build me a DNS server, build me some other bits and pieces, versus, yeah. Is that synonymous with applying baselines? I've never used DSC before. I've never used DSC. Sorry, what do you mean by applying baselines? While we're doing that, we'll just keep going and we will get back to that question. Alrighty, so parameters. Well, due to making a VM, whatever. Okay, so I was quickly going to step off track for a quick sec. So when you apply a DSC configuration, the configuration is applied directly to the machine itself. So it's not really applying a baseline in the sense in the sense configuration is more applied towards to prevent configuration drift. So what I mean by that is if you build a web server, essentially it's somewhat a baseline, but it's more basic. I would say yes, it is a baseline, but it's more of a configuration baseline. So what I mean by that is if you've got a file server and you've deployed a file server and you've got the roles file server installed and you've got that maintained through DSC, DSC will maintain that state. Now, anything else that drifts outside of that, so you've got Mr. Dodgy IT guy over in the help desk who basically goes and installs some third-party app and starts running it on that, DSC will actually remove it because it's outside the configuration. We call that as configurational drift. So it maintains the configuration state and it keeps it in that state. Now, there's different ways you can use DSC, so you can apply it locally, or you can use Azure Automation, but that's for advanced, or that's later down the line for another lecture. So we'll just keep it for that. I hope that's answered your question, and then if we've got any sort of other DSC questions, save them because we're probably going to be able to see them in the future lecture. Parameters. So parameters define the input of the commandlet. So what I mean by that is they basically pass arguments to the script. So the best way to think about that is a DVD player. So the parameters are the buttons on the DVD player. The intention is to play a DVD. For the guys who are basically a little bit more Netflixy, parameters would be actually, we'll just use the buttons for turn on your TV. Not many voice activated TVs out there. So obviously they define how the action should be performed. So that's a really good example. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop for a second. We're going to actually look at so I'm just reading some notes. Okay, so obviously we've just got a quick breakdown of the commandlet, the verb, the noun, the parameter, and the value. So you can see here, I'm just going to bring up my pointer. I'm just going to use an ink color of red because red's not specified. We've got our commandlet. Commandlet is get item. Get item is the commandlet. So if you jump in PowerShell right now and you type get item, you're going to see it right there. It's going to be awesome. The second thing you see is, well, I've actually broken it down. We can see the verb and the noun. The verb is get, and the noun is item. So to create a new file, it would be new item. This is really hard to write with a mouse. Like so. So to remove, it would be remove. The noun stays the same, but the verb describes the outcome. And this is really cool because what it means is that when you do this, you can segment your commandlet. So you're not just having one big executable, one big commandlet that does everything. You're actually making it a little bit easier for people to be able to you're making it a little bit easier for people to be able to articulate, especially from a coding perspective, what is actually transpiring. And that's really, really important. So the other thing we can see here is the parameter. The parameter is actually describing our action. So I'm using a parameter called literal path. Literal path is exactly what it says it is. It's a literal file path. I'm saying see Windows. So obviously the value that we're looking at is we're getting the directory C Windows. So there are other parameters out there in obviously every commandlet, but in this instance we're obviously just exploring that specific parameter. So what do you think we need to change? What value do you think, what element in here, so we've got the verb, the noun, the parameter, the value, would we need to change so that basically this commandlet would execute to C program files? So let's say we wanted to get program files. What do you think we should do? I'm just going to clear the screen. So which one of these we need to change, and what would we need to change it to go and get the directory C program files? So I'm just going to let you guys have 20 seconds. Close. Jad said item. Close. What we need to change is the value. So what we're going to do here is we've got get item, literal path, C Windows. So if we change this to C program files. It helps if I can write terribly. It helps if I can write neater, sorry. If we change the value to C program files, it'll work. And let's just jump in a quick demo because I can quickly show you this. I'm just going to jump in Windows PowerShell. So we're just running, are we running PS Core? Oh, we're just going to run Windows PowerShell, doesn't matter. Oops. I think I just ran, yep, I just opened computer management. So if we just go get item, so we had get item, and then we've got literal path, C Windows, like so. You can get rid of that. If we wanted to change it to C program files, we just need to change the directory. Now you see I did something there, and what I did was tab complete. So you can see PowerShell's smart enough to know that I'm looking at I'm looking at the local file system, and so I can just start tabbing to find my directories. So let's just use C program files. If we hit enter, there's our program files. Now we're not gonna go any further in terms of why I'm wrapping it inside quotes and things like that. That's for another lesson. We're just basically making sure that you guys can understand what a commandlet is, and then we'll address that in a later lecture. So aliases. So PowerShell commandlet aliases are a shortened instance of the commandlet. So they're used to improve the performance when you're just working in the console. So if you need to bash something out and you're just kind of like, yeah, I don't know what that is, mom, just smash it out. Aliases are basically what you're kind of going to be using. So aliases don't have a standard format defined. You can use get alias, and then the alias name, you can just use get alias to get the list of aliases. One of the things I'm going to say though is never use aliases in production code. Aliases in production code slow down readability. You want to be able to, in your code, if someone's looking at your code, you want to be going, okay, for each object blah. So you're not seeing an alias there where somebody is thinking, oh, I don't know what that is. Basically, you're trying to aid readability as best you can. So I'm just going to quickly talk about some quick common ones, which is GM. I use GM an insane amount because when I'm working inside a PowerShell and I'm trying to find things, I'm just going to be like pipe GM. Or another one is FL, which is format list. Again, I'm just going to be pipe format list, bam. Then you've got obviously aliases like dir, ls, gci. They all correspond to get child item. So what we can do is, I'm just going to quickly show you guys the aliases. There we go. So we go get alias. You can see here, there's a lot. There's a lot of aliases. So we've got write output, That's going to be one that you generally use. We've got for each object, where object. These are common ones. You've got clear item. Clear host. I generally do that a lot. Just CLS. Copy, CP, delete, DEL, format list. We talked about that. We've got get child item, GCI. Get clipboard, GCB. So there's a lot there. You don't, like, at the end of the day though, a lot of people are not going to remember an aliases, and you don't want to have to go to get alias to go read your code. So it's really great for when you're going, okay, let's say if we go get process, let's just go get process. So we're listing all our processes on a computer, and then I'm going to go format list. Instead of typing full format list, like so, I can just do FL. It does the exact same thing. It just really helps. It really helps in just writing quick code. So if you're messing around trying to do something, you don't want to have to write the full format list. Even with tab complete, if I can do an FL enter versus an F4 and then tab, then yeah, you definitely are. You're definitely succeeding in PowerShell. So if you guys just quickly pause. So if you guys are definitely interested, make sure if you are on the Discord channel, the slides are up on the in the notebook. So you can just jump in there and then yeah, have a look. So again, if you guys want to see the slides, jump in to the Discord channel notebook, and then they'll be there. Also, if you, I really strongly encourage you guys to jump into the channel and jump into the actual chat, because it's always good to have other people in there and people can talk about it. So I really highly recommend that. Yeah, there's a link on Discord. If you jump on my, I'll actually jump on my Twitch. Oh, sorry, I'll jump on my Twitter right now. G'day, Brett. Stopping in. 517146. And also, if you guys jump in there, I've got a ton of instructions in there that really works. Yep, cool. Sweet, yeah. So if you jump in there, you can join in. I'll add you now. But basically, what I will do, I just want to make sure when you join, it just means that you guys can contribute into it. Like at the end of the day, though, it just works well. So, nearly dragged. There's another gentleman in here. Oh God, Discord's being annoying. One thing you can do is jump in on the notice board. If you jump on the notice board, I've got a whole bunch of stuff in there in terms of the demos and things like that, so we can definitely get you guys set up. You don't have to necessarily do it today, because it's not something that we're generally just kind of touching PowerShell. We're just dipping our toe in the water. But it's something that I definitely recommend. If you guys are going to want to continue with it, definitely go grab it, because like I said, there is an assessment. You guys can go ahead and try and write that assessment. We'll revisit it at the end so everyone can see it. But basically, yeah, we can do that. That's fine. So let's keep going. So sorry if it's a little bit too heavy on the theory. I do really want you guys to basically make sure you have a good understanding of the foundation before we just dive right in code. If we go the other way, it can get really messy. Malik, I can't hear you, mate, so I think you're muted. Yeah, you're muted. Oh, server mute. Weird. Hang on. Can you hear me? Oh, I can't hear you. You look like you're muted. I think you've got a do you have a mic set up? Do you I think you guys have permissions to talk. Let me just quickly check. Students. Yep, everyone's got permissions to talk. You guys can yammer away in there. Yep, you guys can speak. So it must be you must be missing a mouse. Oh, sorry, mouse. You must be missing a mic. That's fine. Okay, I'm just going to add, I'll add Jad into it. One sec, I'm just going to add your role, mate. Student, there you go. G'day. You should see an expanded set of channels under room 01. Yep, there we go. Do you have a mic? It doesn't look like you have a mic. Roles. Yeah, you guys have got the roles, right? You're not server muted or blocked. Okay, I'm good. Cool. All right, sweet. So let's keep going. We'll keep cracking on. So, alrighty, sweet. So let's keep going, and we'll keep. Yep, sweet. So the next thing we're going to need to talk about is important commandlets to know. So these are some basic ones. These are some quick and dirty ones that help you kind of get going into get you started off into PowerShell. So get your feet wet. So first one is get command. So if we're running get command, it's going to return a list of all the commandlets that are currently loaded in PowerShell. Now, if you have, I'm going to quickly talk about a module, and we'll quickly touch on a module, and then we're going to go back to get command. So if you have a module, so for example, let's use the Active Directory PowerShell module. By default, it won't return those commandlets. It will only return those commandlets from that module is when you've loaded the module. So if the module's been loaded into memory and then you do get command, you'll see all the Active Directory commandlets. If you don't, you won't see them, and you'll be sitting there scratching, why can't I see any AD commandlets? The second one is get help. So if you're doing get help, you can get your help for your command. So most commandlets, I'm not going to say all of, because some of them don't, will have a help. So similar to where you had backslash, backslash question mark for command prompt, or dash dash help for Linux, it's the same premise. So basically, there's a help. Most of the time, most commandlets will have help. We're going to actually have a look at that. And obviously, we also have get member. Now, get member basically returns the members, the properties, the methods of an object. This is really, really important, because this is probably my most used commandlet out of every other command, which is kind of insane if you think about that, because I'm using get member because that's how I'm fiddling around in PowerShell, trying to make sure that I'm using the right property or the right value to be able to actually write the correct piece of code. So a great example is with my friend Christian, was he was using get date to return the date, which is completely fine, but he needed to get the weekday. Oh, sorry, the day of the week. So he was using the day of the week property, and which was returning Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then what he did was he took those days and converted them into integers, which is what he needed. But the problem was he actually didn't need to do that, because there was another property underneath there, and this is where you use get member to find that information, where it actually did it for you automatically. So you could simplify 4 lines of code into one property. So this is the reason why get member is really, really powerful. It will help you find things that it's not behaving right. The script's not behaving right for some reason. Get member will tell you why. So let's go and take a quick squiz at these 3 commandlets. So if you're watching via the live on, it's a little bit wonky, because I think I'm just going to stop it because it's stuck on the if you're watching on Discord, I think it's stuck on the PowerPoint, because Discord's not really the best platform for streaming. I'm actually just going to stop it because it's actually quite annoying. So anyway, back to what we're doing. So we're going to use get command. Let's go have a look at commands. So we're going to get command. As you can see, there's all our commandlets. There's a lot. There is a lot. Let's find out how many there are. So actually, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do select object count. Sorry. There's 4,700 commandlets. So there's no way that anyone really could memorize them all. Admittedly, I do think there probably is some people that would probably do that. Personally, I just couldn't be bothered. There's tools to be able to for me to find it. The whole premise is to be able to actually understand the logic of writing PowerShell and understanding why PowerShell exists the way that it does. If you understand those key things, then you're sweet. And then being able to have the tools to be able to navigate it, that's another really important asset. So, get help. Get help gets the help for the command. So if we go get help, and we're going to go get command, like so, we can get a whole bunch of information about the commandlet. So similar to where we had the old ping, we actually using the premise here where it actually breaks it down into a little bit more of a readable format. So we've got our synopsis, we've got our description, we've got our syntax, so we can see what all the different types of syntax is. We've got related links and remarks. So basically we can use get command examples, get command full, get help, get command examples, get help, get command detail, get help, get command more. So we can see some examples. So let's just do that. We can go examples. And so you can see here, now we've just got a whole big list of different examples of using get command. So we can show the list imported, we can show the module. So there you go, we can get command on the module. So that's a really cool one. We can use the app, obviously just the standards. We can even get command. Well, that's very interesting. In terms of arguments and syntax, Okay, we can even get information from certificates from the cert drive. That's cool. That's actually really cool. So there's a lot there that we can actually do, which is really quite cool. But this is the whole premise. You can use get help to actually help you. Now, all this is actually online. So if you actually jump into, we'll just go get command. And just go straight back to DuckDuckGo. Everything is online. This is basically exactly the same as what's in PowerShell itself. So if you don't like PowerShell and it's a little bit too monotone for you, you can just jump straight into a browser and go find it as well. So the documentation's online and locally. Yeah. And now we've got get member. So if we go get process, I don't want you guys to kind of get caught up in the semantics of what I'm doing with the pipeline at the moment, because I'm going to explain that in a moment. I just want you to understand what the commands is capable of doing. So if we go get member, we can see we got a whole bunch of different information about the object. Now this is really important because this information is what's going to be able to help you write your code. If you don't have this information, it can be a lot. It can be very difficult to navigate. So I definitely really strongly recommend that. Yeah, definitely use this. Alrighty, so next one, demo. I think we already actually demoed, but we're going to demo some more. Now, before we do any of that, does anybody have any questions? Any questions? I'm going to leave it for a minute and we will ask some questions and then we'll keep going. While we'll do that, I'll get the demo ready. Okay, cool. No worries. That's good to know. That's really good to know. Thanks, man. Thanks. Alrighty. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about we're going to just do a quick demo of we're going to use we're going to explore the verb noun format. So if I want to retrieve a list of we'll just quickly go through it. So for me to be able to get a list of processes or running processes, back in the day you'd use task list. I know this because I used it a lot. But let's say you had get. So if you wanted to get it in PowerShell, you use get process. And up tab completed. Excuse me, sorry. Everything in PowerShell is tab completable. So you can see there's all my processes. Cool. We can do things with that. And that is completely filterable. We can do a lot of cool things with that. We can be like, all right, I want to get all the processes that have waterfox in it. And there we go. So we can, it's very, very, very powerful. So we're just using get process for the time being so you guys can understand what it's capable of doing. Another really, really handy one is get child item. So let's have a quick look at get child item. So we're now going to be fetching some files and folders. So if we go get child item, we're going to go literal path C/Windows/system32. As you can see, I'm literally just tab completing it. And we are enumerating all the directory, all the files within system32. But that's boring. Get child item has a has what we call, it has a couple extra parameters in it, what we can actually explore with. So what we can actually do here is we can use the file parameter, and it will only return files. It won't return directories. But that's like, okay, that's all right. But what also we're going to do is we're going to use this one, recurse. And this is exactly what it sounds like it's going to do. It's going to recurse through all the subdirectories and child subdirectories of this system32 directory. Now what's really important here to actually note is the fact that you might see some red popping up on the screen. Those files that it's trying to get information on, it doesn't have access to. And what it's doing is it's throwing an error saying access denied, I can't see that. So that's completely fine. As you can see here, we've got a whole bunch of goodies. We've got a whole bunch of really good goodies. And we're only getting the files. That's it. We're only getting files. So let's say you only want to go a couple of directories deep. So again, we can use the depth parameter. So we can say we only want to go 2 directories deep. Again, it will only iterate 2 directories deep. So this is a really good example of how we can actually leverage parameters to be able to achieve a specific objective. In this instance, search the system32 directory 2 directories deep for files recursively. So that's basically get child item. So we've talked about obviously exploring get command and get help. So if we obviously do get help and get command, we can see our commands. Now I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to throw a quick question out there, guys. What do you think the commandlet would be, just off the top of your head? Like it doesn't have to, like it's going to be completely fine for me to get a list of all the virtual machines running on my client Hyper-V machine, on my hypervisor. That's exactly right. 100% right. That's exactly right. It is get VM. Now, to fetch a VM, get VM. I don't have permissions. That's fine. We can just run as admin. Yeah, that's totally fine. But if we want to get VMs, there's a get VMs. So I've got a whole bunch of VMs that are running on my my local machine here. But it gives you a bit of an idea of how to return VMs. So if you want to get a specific VM, again, like you said, we can go DCO1. Done. There's my information. We can actually use format list to see all the information about that. So we can see it's actually not much info, but we can see a whole bunch of info there. Now, if I wanted to actually stop the turn the VM off, I can actually use stop VM. So I can actually, I'm not going to, oh, yeah. Oh, no, it's not running. Docker, no. I can turn off test domain controller. Let's turn off the test domain controller because it's actually not doing anything at the moment. So we can actually then just pipe it and we go stop VM. Now I'm going to talk about piping in a sec, so it's not going to be something that you guys are, we're kind of jumping all over the place here. I'm just kind of trying to get you guys up to speed and on the same page. So stop VM, and it's going to stop my VM, which is completely fine because I'm not even using it. So VM stopped. So if we now do get VM, we can see test domain controller is state is now off. It's pretty straightforward, easy, cool. Now we're going to quickly talk about, obviously we've talked about parameters and things like that. So again, remember a parameter is the action that we're wanting to do. So if we're using the get VM as an example, so if we quickly go back to here, the parameter is name. The parameter is sim session. The parameter is computer name. Anything that has a hyphen as a prefix is a parameter. That's the best way to think of it. It's pretty straightforward. Now let's have a quick look at get alias. So to get alias, we're going to do get alias on get process. Okay, get process doesn't have an alias, so let's just get child item. Ah, fantastic. So what we're going to do, let's just go. There's actually another one I totally forgot about, rename item. It allows you to rename files. That's pretty straightforward. Oops. Go back to here. So what we've got here is, let's use, well, actually it was get child item, wasn't it? Yeah, it was get child item. Okay. So get child item, GCI. So again, we can just go GCI. So if we go back up to our previous one here, instead of using get child item, we can just use GCI, and we can get our same aliases. So completely normal. Like this is completely fine. So same thing, all good. Alrighty. Oh, we already asked for questions. Next part, PowerShell pipeline. So what we actually talked about previously, we're going to now talk about the pipeline, which is actually really important. The pipeline is really what makes PowerShell what it is. It's not another scripting language when it's the pipeline. So when we have a good pipeline. So basically, the pipeline is exactly what it sounds like. It acts like connected segments of pipe. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to send the output from one commandlet into the input of another that is denoted by using the vertical line operator. So it was implemented to reduce the effort, or to reduce effort using complex workloads. From using complex commands and make it easier to flow commands. So a great example is what we did previously with get VM. So we went and get VM name test domain controller, and then we went stop VM. So that basically was a really good example. So we took the output data from that test domain controller, and then we've passed it into stop VM, which stop VM is aware of and is able to handle, and has actually then had the information needed to turn off the virtual machine. So what's the difference between a command prompt pipe and a PowerShell is that command prompt passes text. PowerShell passes objects. So it's a lot more flexible with what it's capable of doing. So traditionally with command prompt, if you were to do something like ping or something like that, the text that's coming out is just text. It is nothing special. In PowerShell, it's an object, and that's really what makes it really powerful. It's because the object, imagine if you're getting a file, you're passing that file object to the next thing where you're doing some manipulation, which you're doing something else, and you're doing something else, and you're using that file object as your medium. So for example, let's say in the file object, you've got the file size, you've got the created date, you've got the last modified date, you've got the permissions, you've got all this information about the file in that specific object that's passing down. So each commandlet could do something different, but still retain the object, which means you're not having to deal with any sort of loss of data. You're actually containing the data, and you're not having to add anything to the code because it's already there. And that's what makes the pipeline so powerful. So let's just use another example. Is we've got we've got that. I've actually just used that example, which was get the actual object. You got the file name, the size, the length, and then you're actually passing that down. Another thing that is obviously was done to reduce effort. This was another thing I totally kind of skipped over. It reduces effort. Things that can be done in the pipeline should be done in the pipeline. I'll use an example. So recently I wrote a piece of code that needed to convert a specific JSON, which is a JSON is a plain text serialization format. Sorry, it's a serialization standard that basically allows you to represent data in plain text, similar to XML. Is to actually be able to dynamically prune large values from the JSON. And what I needed to do was I needed to write some PowerShell to do it. But the thing was, I was looking at it and I actually realized I could write this in one line. And so that's what I did. I actually wrote. So what I did was I actually went and enumerated all the values. I sorted the values. Then I selected the first one. Oh, sorry, no. So I went and fetched the value, each of the property. I went and fetched each of the values. I went and grabbed the size of the values. I then went and sorted that data and then selected the top offending one. So that is something you can do in one pipeline. And that was, one line, done. And so rather than having to have multiple complex lines of code, you just keep piping. I just kept piping it, sending it down the pipeline, because that's what PowerShell is designed to do. Think of it from an Active Directory context, where you'd basically go, okay, I want to get the Active Directory users. I want to be able to reset that user password. I want to be able to re-enable that user. I need to do this. I need to set that manager. I need to do this, and I need to do this. So you can literally just pass that Active Directory object, that user object, and just keep passing it to all the different commandlets, and it will just make it so. So that's really the power of the pipeline and why it's so useful. All right, next thing. Demo time. So we've got, actually, so there's a really good example, is we've got a commandlet called new temporary file. So new temporary file creates exactly what it is. It's actually really handy. It creates a temp file, just completely a temp file in your temp directory. And it creates a file item, and then we can actually pass that data into, when we can actually we can actually write to that file. So new temporary file to set context. Get AD user to disable AD user. Get child item to remove item. So for example, with get child item to remove item, you want to remove a whole bunch of files. There's your answer right there. Obviously it requires a bit of filtering. Oh, excuse me. But that's essentially your answer. All right, demo time. So what we're going to quickly do is we're going to jump back into demo land. And we're going to go get, we're going to actually, just trying to think of the easiest. Okay, let's just get, hang on, did I write some notes for my demo? Oh, I did, I wrote some notes for my demo. Okay, so you can actually follow along with this if you want. This is completely follow alongable. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to okay, that's pretty cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to PowerShell here, and we're actually going to do a quick demo here. So we're going to create a directory on my D drive. So I'm going to go to D colon, there's my D drive. I don't necessarily have to do this. This is just me back in the command prompt days. I'm going to go new item path. I'm going to create a directory. We're going to create a directory in there called, I'm going to call it path. I'm going to call it demo2 because I already have a demo. And we're going to go item type, and we're going to, item type tells me what type of item it is. It's exactly what it says. And it's a directory. And it's actually interesting because you can see there's a directory, some link, junction, hard link, file. You have so many different things there. So what we're going to do is we've now created a directory there. So if I do get child item, we will see Oh shoot, I created it in C drive. It's on C drive, sorry. So if I go CD backspace, and then we actually I don't need to do that. FYI, I can just get child item literal path C, and we'll just go type. Oh, we can actually just use the directory parameter. There's our demo2 directory. Cool. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to basically now demonstrate the pipe. So we're going to use getDate, which returns the date. It's pretty straightforward. And then we're going to pipe it to set content. So set content, and I'm using tab complete. And I'm using set content. So what it's going to take is the output of getDate, and then it's going to pass that, and then it's going to pass it into set content, which is going to create, it's going to write that data to a file. So now if we go literal path, and we're going to go cdemo, and we're going to go demo01.txt, like so. Could not find part of the text. Could not find part of the path. Because the reason why is because when I created it, I called it demo2. So if we go demo2, no response. Fantastic. So now if we actually go and have a look at it, so if we go to, we can actually go and go get child item, literal path, c.demo2, and then we're just going to use file. Actually, no, we don't. We're not going to do that. We're just going to see it. There you go. There's our data. And now let's have a look at that content. So what we're going to do is we're going to go get child item. We're going to go say get item. We're going to go literal path. We're going to go c demo2 demo01.txt, and then we're going to go get content. Get content is the command to actually read data, and we hit enter, and there's our data. So we've just read the data from a text file. So that's a really, really cool example of the pipeline. So what we're going to do is we've got another cool demo. We're going to use MS Paint as our example. So let's jump back into PowerShell. We're going to go back in here, and we're going to go MS Paint. So same to your run, you can just type the system32 executable, and it will just work. That's fine. So what we got here is our paint executable, and we're going to use get process. But actually, no, we're not going to start paint like that. We're going to start paint the PowerShell way. We're going to go start process, and we're going to go file path MS Paint. The correct file path would be C Windows System 32 mspaint.exe, but we're just going to say MS Paint. Now we have our paint open. We are happy. So now we can actually use get process, and we're going to go name MS Paint, and you can see that's the process information about MS Paint. It's using I don't know how much that is in terms of 6 cores. It's using 0.019 of my CPU usage. It's got some bits and pieces there. We can actually see even more information about that. So let's just have a quick look at what we can actually see in on Microsoft Paint. Thanks, Shoes, mate. I really appreciate it. So if we go format list, not much info. So okay, we just got caught out by something. We've got format list, and we see we didn't have all that information. But if we go property, and then we say we're going to use the wildcard, which is any sort of programming language. A wildcard is basically everything. It's an everything kind of. It basically says anything, everything. We're going to use star, and watch this when we hit enter. Now we have a ton of information about it. We've got the working set, we've got the synchronized object, we've got more information we don't even know what to do with. We've got the modules, we've got the descriptions, we've got the, it's just an insane amount of information that's just been passed through into this. Fantastic. But we're sysadmins, we want to stop that. This MS Paint's gone on for long enough. It's going, we're getting rid of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to get process. We're going to go name MS Paint. Now, admittedly, if we do a quick get process, we can see there all our processes. But we just going to focus on MS Paint. So we're going to use the name parameter, and we're going to go name MS Paint, because if we have a look in here, yeah, so this is the process name, and and it will be MS Paint. So if we look in here, there it is there. So we're just going to do that. So if we go MS Paint, and then we're going to go, oops, I just hit enter when I shouldn't have. MS Paint, and then we're going to go stop process. It also helps if I spell. So again, I'm tab completing. So I'm just hitting tab. So as you can see there, I just went PRO, tab complete, tab complete, stop process. Hit enter, watch paint on the right side, gone. So that basically, we stop paint. Now, a really cool thing with get process, I just quickly want to touch on, you can get remote processes very easily. I can't on this because it's not domain joined, but it's just worth noting that you can get remote processes on this. So yeah, cool. Alrighty, so any questions? I'm just going to leave it for another 10 seconds. Another couple of seconds. Alrighty, let's keep going. If there's questions, there's questions. So I know you use okay. So I've noticed you use literal path instead of path. Is any specific reason why? Yes. Literal path is is exactly what it says. It's literal path. Path is a non-literal path. And so what that means is that path is the PowerShell's loaded path as well as the path that you're referencing. So what I mean by that is, so for example, we've got C users Michael Zanata, right? And so if I get child item path, let's say C Windows System 32, the data that gets returned will also the file. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of a memory blank for a sec. Okay, the file objects that get returned from this will also include C users Michael Zanata, as well as C Windows System 32. Now, sometimes that's okay, but other times that's real bad. And I've been caught out where I've write a cleanup script, and the default directory was running on my local profile, and I literally nuked my entire profile. The reason why I use literal path is because it's explicit. It says I do not want to use any sort of yes, and it will catch you out. And this is the reason why. So if you're wanting to be 100% sure where you want to go, use literal path. And I use it as a habit now. I don't actually use path anymore. I just use literal path out of habit. So that's one of the reasons why. Anyway, so let's keep going. So we're going to quickly talk about writing some basic PowerShell scripts. I'm not going to go too deep again into this because this is not something that, this is kind of, again, safe for later lectures. This is not something we're going to be able to fit in. We've also got, 20 minutes left. So, things to know is the script extensions. So, script extensions for PowerShell are .ps1s. So if you see a PowerShell script, it's going to be named .ps1. Modules are going to be either named .psm1 or psd1. They're most likely going to either be one or the other or both. We're not going to be talking about why that's the case because that's another lecture for another day, but it's worth noting. Now, PowerShell also comes in many, many flavors. So we're going to talk about the first couple, and then we will go from there. So versions 1 and 2. So Windows 7, it's Windows Server 2008 R2. Versions 3 and 4 are Windows 8, Windows Server 2012, Windows 2012 R2. Next to set execution policy, 3 and 4 has a lot of bugs. Yes, 100%. Now, one of the things that I've obviously got there, don't use, not recommended. If you're using PowerShell 2, I would strongly recommend you upgrade your Windows Management Framework and update it. So you can actually update PowerShell on legacy OSs to a current version. So on Windows, you can actually pretty much go ahead and install Core if you really wanted to. But basically, do not use version 1 or 2. It is really, really, really tangled. If you are, I would strongly recommend updating PowerShell. Versions 3 and 4. PowerShell got good in version 3. It really did get good in version 3. Version 4, it added some extra cool features. But like, I remember I've got my PowerShell shirt lying around somewhere, and one of the guys was like, "Oh, you know, okay, why is that shirt PowerShell 3? It's my really nice PowerShell shirt." And I said, "Well, because PowerShell 2 was the was my first PowerShell shirt, and it's pretty average." And then he's like, "What about PowerShell 1?" And I said, "There was nothing in PowerShell 1," and that's true. PowerShell 1 had nothing. It was literally bare bones. So if I see PowerShell 1, I'm feeling old. That'll be running on Server 2003 even potentially. Anyway, versions 3 and 4. It's not recommended. You can use it. Definitely not recommended, but it's usable. Versions 5 and 5.1. Versions 5 and 5.1 fixed a lot of things. 5.1 is basically what's running on every 10 instance right now. You can run 5.1 on 10. All good, ready to go. What we were demoing with 5.1. Now, I'm not going to be talking about too much about why. We're not going to be focusing on the language in this specific lecture. These lectures, we're going to be focusing on the logic, because the logic's more important than the language. We're not going to be focusing on the versions. We're going to be working with 5.1 for the time being, because 5.1 is a good foundation for 6 and 7. If we don't, we're going to be kind of having issues. So we're just going to be focusing on the logic for this time. So with obviously versions 5 and 5.1, that's basically Windows 10 Server 2016, and then 6 and 7. So 6 and 7 is PowerShell Core. PowerShell Core basically runs on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So my wife's Mac, which is now a desktop, this is actually now a desktop. Traditional, I actually had I installed Homebrew on that, and I had PowerShell Core running on that because I needed to test her. She needed a way to be able she needed a way to test her website. So I wrote some pester logic to do that for her. So she could just run it, and it would run PowerShell. It was running PowerShell on Mac, and it was perfectly fine. So that's a really good example of cross-platform compatibility. And that's really where PowerShell has kind of changed, and why it's in version 6 and 7 it's a lot more different, because it's cross-platform. It can run on multiple operating systems. The biggest thing with PowerShell 6 and 7, however, is that 6 and 7 basically is a complete redo of PowerShell. PowerShell 6 and 7 is built on .NET Core. It's not built on .NET Framework. So remember .NET 2, .NET 3, .NET 4, we're now .NET 4.6 in Windows. .NET Core is a complete rewrite of .NET. And .NET Core's intention is to be run on Linux, Mac. It's multi-platform. So that's why PowerShell is cross-platform, is because it's running on .NET Core. It's really important to understand. So PowerShell Core is really the future. That's really where a lot of our code's going. So currently I've got a lot of projects to rewrite modules into PowerShell Core, which is not too much of a challenge, because obviously most of the code's going to continue to work. And PowerShell Core and PowerShell, they literally are the same thing. Like, you can pretty much write, if you can write for Windows PowerShell, you can write for PowerShell Core. There are slight differences in terms of there's just more features in PowerShell Core, but essentially it's PowerShell, so you're fine. Yep. Okay, so one of the things I want to talk about is some do's and don'ts. This is something that I always find it important for people to have a good understanding of why from the get-go, and then if you follow it from the get-go, you're good. Which version was coming out in .NET Core 3? Was it PS8? It's .NET Core, because it's currently .NET Core. Oh no, it's PS7. PS7 is in preview at the moment. Is it preview? Yeah, PS7's in preview at the moment. So yeah, when it goes GA, which should be in 2 months, general availability, that will be yeah, that's built in .NET Core 3. And in .NET Core 3, it adds the one thing that everyone's kind of been at and wanting for ages, which is WinForms and XAML. So you can actually create forms in PowerShell. The reason why is obviously OAuth needs that part of the process to work. So yeah, that is kind of limiting the scope of a lot of API interactivity. So anyway, do's and don'ts. Use the full commandlet name. So when you're writing scripts, don't write aliases. I've talked about this before. Do not write aliases, write the full commandlet name. When using use the full parameter name. Now you can actually take shortcuts with parameters. I didn't show you this, but you can actually go, for example, if you got get VM, you could just go NA and then type the name. It's fine. PowerShell will kind of fill in the blanks. When using high-risk commandlets, use what if. What if parameter is basically is one of the most useful piece of code that sorry, is the most useful switch in PowerShell to quickly test your code before you run live. And the reason why I say this is because I've had clients where they've jumped in PowerShell, gone gung-ho in PowerShell, haven't tested their code, hit, and they've deleted thousands of Active Directory objects. Lot of pain. So PowerShell is, if you're using a high-risk commandlet, so things like remove, set, update, anything that is other than a get, and that is doing some sort of write, you better what if it, because if you don't, you might be doing a lot more damage than you should. Document your code. Documentation is so important. You might understand something now because it's in your mind and fresh. The moment you fast forward 6 months into the future and you're rereading that code, you're just going to be like, no, I don't understand that. If you document your code, it makes it much easier to understand the intention of why you're doing it. It also helps your colleagues as well. So if your colleagues are reading your code, they're not sitting there scratching their heads. Space your code. Readability is important. If it's a one-liner and it's a pipe, that's fine. If it's you trying to be clever and putting it in one line, that's obfuscation, and that is just going to cause the person to scratch his head and ask why. So if it needs to be spaced out, space it out. It makes readability so much easier. And I mean properly space it out. So if you've got an if statement or something like that, indent your code so that the person knows, okay, this is this code's being executed as a result of that condition, where versus it just having it bits in and out here and there, it makes it much more difficult to understand what is going on. So that's that part. This is actually, I put a tweet out on this, and this is something that to this day it irks me out a little bit. So don't run code you don't understand. So I was chatting to a guy at Microsoft Ignite earlier this year about this, what I did, and he's like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "I write PowerShell. I'm a PowerShell guy. That's my bread and butter." And he's like, "Oh, I'm surprised that people, we still need people like you by that." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, I just go to Stack Overflow on Google and just copy and paste a whole bunch of scripts and I'm good to go." And I literally looked at him for a second and I thought, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And the reason why is because if you don't understand the code that you're running, one, aka, yes, the first intention, it could be malicious, but two, if you don't understand what's being executed, you could be introducing a bug you don't fully understand. And if you can introduce the bug that you fully can't understand, then you could be asking for a lot of trouble, and there could be a massive impact from something that you just got online. So running code that you don't understand is bad. Now, I'm not saying you can just jump on, like, you can still go grab code. That's completely fine. But understanding its intention is really the key thing there. Now, there's PowerShell modules and things out there that basically will simplify things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about physical code that someone's wrote to do a specific task. That's the thing that you need to worry about. So if we're talking about a PowerShell module, so I've wrote a desire to learn PowerShell module, then some guy, that's completely fine. That I should have done my due diligence in testing that. That's completely fine. But if I basically but if you've jumped online and you've just grabbed a PS1 file out there and started working with it, you could be in a little bit of trouble. So it's definitely slow down and take time to understand it. And the thing is that also it helps you learn. The more, if you read something, you go, why did he do that? And then you kind of go through it, and then you go, well, actually, that's actually really cool. You actually can take that little snippet and then apply it to your coding. Script execution policy. So Shu's actually talked about this in the chat earlier, and we'll quickly touch on it. The script execution policy was implemented to protect against the execution of unauthorized code. So if you remember back in the days of Windows 95, Windows 98, there was a virus called Windows 95 CIH. And at the time, it basically ran and attempted to refresh the BIOS of your machine. No backup. On motherboards back then, your motherboard was bricked. You had the Melissa virus, which was a mass mailing macro virus. It was basically attached to Microsoft Word and Outlook. And you had the I love you bug, or the love bug. And that was basically a computer worm, which was written in VB script. To combat any sort of viruses that were written in PowerShell, basically Microsoft implemented the script execution policy. And so it's configurable through group policy, or it can be set in the console. And what that basically does is when you're initially running PowerShell scripts on a freshly built Windows machine, it just won't work. Now, yes, you can get around it. There's things you can do, but initially you need to use set execution policy, which is the commandlet set execution policy, and to change that. So we can just quickly demo that. So if we run PowerShell as an administrator, we can just go set execution policy. And then we can have our execution policy. And you can see we've got different types. We've got all signed, bypass, default, remote signed, restricted, undefined, unrestricted. These all describe how the PowerShell commandlet is going to be executed. So this is something that I'm going to quickly touch on. I kind of am running out of time here, so I'm trying to keep this wrapped up very, very soon. But essentially, all signs, your scripts can run. Bypass, nothing's blocked. There's no warnings or prompts. Default is just a default. Restricted is basically for Windows clients. Remote signed is for Windows servers. Remote signs also your default execution policy. So scripts can run requiring digital signature. So you have signed code. If it's signed, obviously Windows trusts it. If something, for example, someone writes a virus and they sign it, Microsoft can, and it gets known that that specific script is signed with a specific certificate, Microsoft can just revoke that certificate and then it won't run anymore. So it's the intention that you sign your code, it's trusted. Obviously, unsigned code's untrusted. You've got restricted, and then obviously undefined. There's so many there. The biggest one is if you want to be able to just run your code, you can just use unrestricted, which will just run everything. So yeah. The PowerShell ISE. So as you guys can see in the OBS, in Discord, we have we're using Visual Studio Live as a so we're going to be using Visual Studio Code as our examples for our future lectures. But if you're wanting to get started in PowerShell and write some code, use the PowerShell ISE. So this is the PowerShell ISE. It's really, really, really handy to use. It's basically a PowerShell host. It's a graphical editor. You have syntax coloring, tab completion, IntelliSense, visual debugging, all that kind of goodness. And it's built for scripting. So that kind of gets you started off. I personally now use Visual Studio Code because I've just I can't live without it. There's features in Visual Studio Code that I use all the time, and it has a lot more little bits and pieces that the ISE doesn't support. But at the same time, though, the ISE is incredibly, incredibly handy to know about. So what we're going to quickly do is we're going to write a quick script in the ISE, and then we are going to just quickly demo it. So I'm going to do a write host hello world, We're going to save this. We're going to put this in cdemo2, like so, and we can then click on this button, which is run script, or we can hit F5 and that will run our script. Now this is still a full-blown PowerShell console, so we can get process. It all still works. Now the cool thing with this is we can actually, I'm just going to quickly copy that line, and I'm just going to create a second line there like so. And I'm going to break point. And what I did there was I just pressed F9, or you can basically right click and you can toggle breakpoint. So you can do that there like so. Basically a breakpoint when debugging, with a breakpoint with debugging, basically you can start your code, execution will pause on that thing, and again you can see here we're in a debug, and guess what, I can still run PowerShell. And this is really cool because it means that if you're working on a really complex PowerShell thing and it's not running quite right, you can pause the execution and actually test your line of code before it runs and do something. So if you're thinking, oh, the filter or something's not right, this is a really handy way of being able to test your code. And then obviously we can step. So I've just basically used F11 to step to the next line, and we've completed. So yeah. I use the scope process parameters out of habit whenever setting the policy in case I forget to change it back. Yep, that's cool. Yeah, very, very smart. And that's exactly right. Like at the end of the day, PowerShell execution policy is something to be very careful with. At the end of the day, I've kind of just got it unrestricted on mine because I'm kind of just smashing things out, and I'm generally fairly careful with what I do. But obviously in production environments, you've got to be very, very careful. So yes. All right, so I think that's pretty much that in terms of the ISE. What I've obviously got, yes, questions. Anyone have questions? I'm going to give it 20 seconds. We are definitely at 4 minutes to 11, 3 minutes to 11, and we are pretty much, I think we're pretty much done. So, any questions? Just going to give a few more seconds. Alrighty. Let's get going. Automating with PowerShell. So one of the things, okay, so with regards to lectures, it will be same time this time, because obviously I'm not sure when people are around the world. It'll be technically it's 9 a.m. It's 9 a.m. Saturday morning in Brisbane, Australia. So it'll basically be that time every week. So it's basically going to be same time. We're going to continue on with the course. So, automating with PowerShell. So, we're going to quickly talk about control flow, sequences. Oh, yeah, sweet. We're going to talk about sequences and things like that. I'm going to try and flow through this because I am running out of time and I know my wife has a hair appointment. So, control flow, sequences, and we're talking about babies, and now that's kind of a little bit weird, but I'm going to try and get you guys a little bit get a bit of an understanding of why we're talking about control flow. So people always think that writing code is difficult to understand and it's quite complicated. However, all programming is actually simplified into sequences. So recently, actually, it's a couple of months ago, my little bub I've got, she's undergone her 7th leap. And the 7th leap is an increase in mental development of the baby. Oh, sorry, a leap is basically an increase in mental development for a baby. Now, in this specific instance, the 7th leap is actually she's learning all about sequences. And sequences is important because that actually, for a baby, because they need to be able to understand it. They need to be able to understand to achieve an outcome, a certain level of steps need to be performed correctly in order. So for example, let's use an example as brushing our teeth. So to brush our teeth, we need to pick up our toothbrush, we need to pick up the toothpaste, we need to check if the toothpaste is empty. If it is, go and open a new toothpaste. We need to open the cap, we need to squeeze onto the toothbrush. Has enough been squeezed? Yes or no? If there's not, continue squeezing. Put down the toothpaste, put in mouth, brush. Have we brushed for long enough? 4 minutes. If not, continue brushing. Once we have completed, let's spit in the bowl. Is the tap turned on? No, it's not. Let's turn it on. Now we're going to rinse our mouth and then we're completed. So it's a really good example of what control flow or sequencing is, how important it is for babies to learn. It's exactly the same for programming, and we naturally perform these if-then tasks. And so for babies, obviously, it's really difficult. Like when I gave this lecture initially, I actually used one of the square box with all the little blocks in it, and I actually got people to talk me through exactly how they're putting the block in the hole. And that sounds really, really simple, but the thing is for a baby, geez, that's a complete different set of steps. They don't fully understand they have to grasp the block in the correct fashion. They need to be able to identify the correct hole. They need to be able to place the block, rotate the block for it to be able to fall in. We naturally do it. We just basically have gotten to the point where these kinds of series, these sequences have become autonomous. And so when we're learning to write code, it's basically taking our mindset back to that initial thought of these if-then-else statements. And once we've understand that, then we can kind of scale back out and understand what the actual intention of what the outcome is. So, for example, let's use, the assessment was we need to build some VMs and we need to do some bits and pieces and install some software. That's your outcome. That's our outcome. But we now go, okay, we need to write the sequences for that to happen. And to make that to happen, we need to understand a little bit about the logic. And so once we've understand the logic, then we can actually write our sequence and then we have our answer. And so this is where, by us naturally doing these if-then-else statements, we actually already innately have the ability to do it. It's just that we kind of automated it and then forgot about it. So we're not going to obviously so flow control is exactly the same with any sort of language, whether it's SQL, PowerShell, C#, C++, Python, Go, anything. They all have a series of sequences that need to be achieved to be able to achieve the outcome. So flow control is something that's going to be very slow to learn. It took me about a year, but once it actually is learned, you accelerate very, very quickly. So when someone comes to me and says, Michael, I need you to do this, and I will literally think there for about 30 seconds and think of all the different things I need to do, and I'll go, okay, I need to go, and it's not line for line. It'll be more like, okay, I need to go talk to that API, I need to go do that, do that, do that, do that, do that. And once I've done that, then I can go, okay, think about it, and then basically come up with a quick quote and go, okay, it's going to take me this much time and effort. It's going to cost this much. And so when you get to that point, when I actually sit down to write, for example, that specific outcome for that little segment, I'll go, okay, I just do it because I know that it's that specific series of steps that I need to do. For example, if I need to go talk to an API, I know from previous experience from other sequences that I've used that they're just plug and play. So I can grab, oh, that part there, chuck that in, grab that part, chuck that in. Oh, I need some logging, I can just grab that logging snippet. So it's necessary. It's really important to understand. And then once you've once you've understood it, you can then just apply it to anything. It's really, really quite cool. One thing though is this is a perishable skill. If you don't use it, you will lose it. So a great example is I wrote VBScript I wrote VBScript in 2006 or 7, I think it was 6. And then I moved from PowerShell in 2013. In 2012, I was fluent as all hell. I was very good at VBScript. And then basically going to PowerShell, I actually had to quickly step back to write some VBScript code, which was the worst experience I've ever had to do in my life. I lost a lot of the sequencing in VBScript. I've actually completely started losing the control flow and how VBScript was working. And so I'm sitting there going, why is this not working? Oh, wait, it's this. And so it's actually something that I had to go relearn. So it's a perishable skill. So yeah, if you don't use it, you will lose it. Object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming is a methodology for grouping properties, methods, or actions. So a good example is you're just grouping instructions together that really is just it's just basically grouping things together that I just literally had a memory blank. That have that represent that specific value. So let's use an example. I got my coffee cup here. Okay, so this, let's say, is an object. I'm going to take the spoon out because that's going to complicate things quite quick. We've got a label on it, we've got color, we've got the shape, we've got the size, all these kinds of things. They all pertain to this cup. So these would all be properties. So we're just grouping all those different bits and pieces into their own respective, what we call objects. So let's use as a car object. So a car object would have items pertaining to a car, not a hot air balloon. Similarly to this would have items pertaining to this cup, where it wouldn't pertain to a car. Now, the car has a cup holder. We're going to talk about that in a moment. We can talk that about another time. But basically, they're different. That's just it. It's just a grouping. You're just grouping different things together to create. Yeah, it's just grouping. It's just a way of grouping different things together. So objects contain data in the form of properties and fields. Storage. So that's like the color of this cup is turquoise. The size of this cup is certain centimeters or certain inches. The methods, we have methods. Methods is basically executable code. So executable code could be empty cup. So if I tip this upside down, it's probably going to put stuff everywhere. But if I tip this and empty the cup, that would be a method. That's an action or an executable piece of code that we want to do to achieve a specific task. Now in PowerShell, we use getMember to show the list of properties and methods that are attached to an object. So if we quickly jump back into PowerShell, let's quickly jump back into this one. And we use getMember. So up the top here, we can see the type of the object. So think of this, the type of this object is a cup. The type of this object is system.diagnostics.process. Now we have all these different properties within here. We've got the machine name, we've got the main modules. They're just data. It's just data. You can play with that data, you can change it. It's just data, but it pertains to that. Similarly, the color pertains to this. Name, main module, all that pertains to that. Then you have in here, we have methods. So we've got, for example, kill, refresh, start, toString, close, dispose, equals. They're executable code. So if you're in an instance of an object, if we use the stop method, or sorry, the kill method, that would close the close MS Paint. We can actually show you that. Let's just start MS Paint quickly, and then let's go get process name MS Paint. We're going to put this in a variable, and we go var.stop. Oh, sorry, kill. It's gone. It's executable code. That's all what methods is. It's very, very simple. Now, the things with objects is that they're type specific. So what I mean by that is this is a phone This is a phone object. This is a cup. They're not the same. It's the same with anything else. If you've got a phone and a cup, they're not the same. If you've got a spoon and a cup, they're not the same. Everything is different. Now, if you've got two cups side by side, so if I had a second cup, actually, if I've got two spoons here, I've got porridge on it, these are the same because they're a spoon, but they're different sizes. They have different attributes. That's completely fine, but they are the same because they're a spoon. Comparatively, a spoon and a cup is not the same. Hope that makes sense. Now I'm going to quickly touch on classes. So classes is simply put, so when people talk about classes, a class is simply put is a blueprint. It's a blueprint to a cup. It's a simple blueprint to a cup. So if you think about as a car, you have a blueprint for a car. You have all the wheels, you have all that information. An object is a physical representation of that. This is an object. I created this cup by using a blueprint or a class of cup. So the class is cup. I've got my cup now because I created the object. It's a physical representation of the class. That's actually a really good example. I hope you guys, that's pretty much that. Do you guys have any questions with regards to that? So this is the last slide. I'm not going to do the demo because I'm pretty much out of time, and this is really kind of this demo is not really going to be. We've kind of demoed all the elements, so we're going to kind of skip that. Yep, cool, no worries. Thanks, mate. That's really appreciated. I think with you guys, so I'm just going to quickly step back into assessment. So we're pretty much session has completed. So if we quickly jump back, I'm going to quickly go back right to the top. So like I said, again, if you miss it, or you wanting to you know, replay something, this is all online. So you can watch it via my Twitch channel. If you search the Brisbane PowerShell user group on YouTube, it will be up there. It's basically if you search on YouTube PowerShell101Live, you'll get it. So everything is streamed. It's all online, so you can definitely replay it. Assessment. So I'm going to quickly go back to this because this is something I kind of want you guys to work with, because at the end of the day, though, it's helping yourself. If it's helping yourself, you're then going to improve your skills. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So what we're going to do is we're going to automate the following. Now, throughout the series, you can continue to refactor this code as we explore different PowerShell techniques. But essentially, you can submit it. I'll have a quick look at it and I can provide some feedback. Obviously, I don't have the power. Actually, I could issue a certificate, but that certificate's not going to mean anything because people don't know really who I am. But at the end of the day, though, the assessment's really going to be for your benefit. If you basically do it, you're going to basically learn something. It's more homework, but it's over the series. So first thing we're going to do is using Client Hyper-V, we are going to build a VM. Following that, we're going to install Windows 10. We're going to install OBS Studio version 24, and we're going to install Visual Studio Code. So we're going to do it through PowerShell, and then right at the very end, we're going to be doing it in DSC. So that's going to be something once we've once we have the DSC talk, which will be the very last one, we'll be doing it in DSC. But anyway, I think that is it for me. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know there was a few people popping in and out, so we'll see how we go. But definitely, if you liked it, stick around. So, like I said, we'll quickly jump into another slide. This is the curriculum. So we're going to basically be doing an introduction to what we just covered today. We're going to be looking a lot more extensively at object-oriented programming. We've got PowerShells and objects, PowerShell and filtering, PowerShell and looping, scripting with PowerShell, and then we're going to basically go to debugging. We're going to be doing PowerShell to just getting around in it, functions and advanced functions, and we're going to be stepping it right up. And then we're going to be using the internet with PowerShell, logging, testing, and configuration as code. So a lot of, it's going to be starting at 0 and we're going to 10 in terms of difficulty. So this should be a really good course to get you across everything, get you up and running quickly, and at the same time you'll obviously take stuff home, which is really good, and hopefully you guys, I hope you guys like it. Anyway guys, I've got to go. My wife's just texted me. She needs to go to a hair appointment. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next Saturday. Bye for now.